Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, coming at you live to talk about some spoilery stuff regarding The Last Jedi. It's only been out for a few days as of the time of this recording, a little longer than that, but, not everybody has seen it. If you clicked on this video, this is going to be a spoilery discussion for the most part. That's your first, last, and only warning. Spoilers. Going to be talking spoilers about The Last Jedi. Click off this video if you haven't already seen the film. And, okay, so what this primarily has to do with is Luke Skywalker. The depiction of the character in The Last Jedi and the outpouring and outcrying of disenchantment and disappointment that I hear coming from a lot of people surrounding his character and what their expectations for him were, what their preconceived notions and preconceptions were, which extends out to the grander, what they assume Star Wars to be, what they think it is, what they think it ought to be, and all those kinds of things, which is a whole separate discussion. But I have found it fairly mightily irksome, the poor impression some people have on Luke Skywalker. I have heard him, described as being a coward, a wimp, having no courage, running away, tucking tail and running, people disparaging a particular moment that we have revealed in two parts from two different points of view, where he nearly succumbed to the dark side, even many years on from where we left him in Return of the Jedi, where he, for just a split second, in feeling the darkness that had welled up inside his nephew Ben Solo, who would go on to become Kylo Ren, for a split second, he had this call to want to murder his nephew for all of the darkness and the hate and the murder and the bloodshed that he saw just over the next horizon that would be wielded and commanded by his nephew. And ironically, because he had that moment of weakness and he was caught by Ben, it was very much, the instigating factor that brought those fears to their realization. But so people have been heavily disappointed with the characterization of Luke Skywalker. And it seems to me mostly that what their impressions on him are derive out of where we left him in the original trilogy as this perfect hero character. It's interesting, the irony, because people are disparaging the character of Rey for being an air quotes Mary Sue. A pitch perfect, can do no wrong, can fall to no harm, super character, And on the same token, we're given a hero who is flawed, who makes mistakes, who is not perfect, who is still, even at this elder age, learning and making missteps and being very human. And, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say on the one hand she's too perfect and that's why it's wrong, and then he's too imperfect and that's why it's wrong. It's like a smack upside the head. It's like, where are you coming from? And I think a lot of it has to do with the generational gap, the people like myself who grew up with the original trilogy. It's easy to fall into this estimation of what these characters are, what they were when we left them. There's a 30-year gap, between the original trilogy, where we left everybody, and where we pick up with them again in The Force Awakens. Did Han Solo go out heroically? Did he go out in a blaze of glory like people thought would be the case? No, he was murdered by his own son. The same young man that, sent Luke into exile. But the thing is that, and there are a lot of misconceptions and misgivings about why did he go into exile? Why did he have that fleeting moment of wanting to kill Kylo, or, Ben Solo before he became Kylo? And all these things. And I think I kind of equate it back to the DC comic Kingdom Come, where Superman, an elder Superman, had gone into self-imposed exile because the world was changing, and he was, he's the big blue boy scout, and there were more anti-heroes swelling, and there was a swelling of metahumans and superheroes and all that stuff the world over anyway, in the entire universe. You could throw a rock and hit a hero of some type, but they were becoming less honorable. They were starting to kill criminals and all this kind of stuff, and it was conflictual for him. He was kind of old school, but there was more a deep ingrained misgiving about his place in the world, and so he kind of went into exile. And what we saw with Luke, you have to understand that from where we left him in the original trilogy, he began to seek out the history of the Jedi. He wanted to reform them. He thought that in the hollow bastion that the galaxy had become in the wake of the Empire, while there were still fleeting aspects like the First Order and other such factions existing that could potentially build themselves up again and wreak havoc again, his best estimation was find the history of the Jedi, track down these temples, track down their artifacts, those collected by Palpatine, those still in hiding that were protected and never found and never had surfaced, and try to recreate the benevolent aspect, the idealistic aspect of that order, in the hopes of, adding a level of semblance and stability to the galaxy. Now, as a part of this, he takes under his wing his nephew. He is entrusted by his best friend Han Solo and his sister, the mother of Ben Solo, Leia, to take Ben, who has a certain level of force capability, under his wing and try to teach him and try to mold him into what this idealistic view of the Jedi are. I think, if anything, what you should be gleaning, and this is something that comes heavily out of the prequels, but it's something that comes out of the dialogue in the Last Jedi itself, is that the pomp and circumstance, the pomposity, the, just stagnation, and all that kind of stuff to do with the Jedi, where the Jedi were, because they were so cocksure and assured of themselves, they became complacent. They didn't see the rising up, the upswell of the dark energies of Palpatine, Darth Sidious, Darth Maul, and Darth Vader. They didn't see it coming because they couldn't see beyond their own noses. They drove themselves into the ground. That ideal, that beautiful ideal of the benevolent, warriors who are out to defend the innocent and save innocents and fight off the evil wills of the galaxy, it's all so much folklore and mythology. It's not real. It has kernels based in truth. But really, they stagnated, and they became complacent, and they became blind to the actual legitimate threats, and it is part and parcel with their ignorance that was born out of that, out of their self-assuredness, that suddenly the Empire and Palpatine, Sidious, and these Sith Lords rose to power. This was a lesson Luke began to understand and appreciate and learn. he began to understand that he had the wrong idea. Everybody, we the viewers, have the same aspect he had when he went out on his journey to try to seek these artifacts of the Jedi and try to reforge the Jedi, bring them back. We as viewers have that same estimation. We have not been on the journey he traveled, where he uncovered and began to realize it's all been lies. It has not all been for the greater good. The Jedi are just as, sort of guilty of bringing about all of the destruction that was wrought, forging on the opposite ends of the Force spectrum all of that evil, all of that darkness that would lead to the Death Star being brought about, being constructed, and then the subsequent Death Star, and then, all that kind of stuff. Luke began to see the error of his ways. But it was only an aftermath of his being instigated to that by that moment of weakness, where he sensed the future of Kylo Ren in his nephew Ben Solo. He saw the darkness, the bloodshed, the murder, the pain, the anguish that he would go and reap across the galaxy. And for a fleeting moment, Luke, who was about the benevolence, the light side of the Force, reforging the Jedi, he knew in that moment, even I myself am imperfect. This ideal, this concept of the Jedi that I wield, that I hold, and my estimation of them, it's not right. And there in that fleeting moment, Ben fought back, destroyed the burgeoning Jedi Academy, killed anyone who wouldn't side with him, took the Knights of Ren, those who would side with him, and left assuming that he had murdered Luke. Or perhaps arguably fended off, an attack from Luke, even though Luke wasn't going to carry it through. See, that's something people are missing. He wasn't going to murder Kylo. He didn't get stopped from murdering him. He had a fleeting moment of weakness that was born from the darkness, from the fear. Because he is human imperfect. He is not a Mary Sue, heroic, perfect being, perfect character. He is still, whether you like it or not, a human being with all of the fragility and the fears and the conflictions internally. He was not some perfect estimation Jedi. And for me, this grounds his character that much more so for the character turn we see in the film, where he becomes that again. He becomes a Force projection manifestation of that Luke again, because he finds his way. He understands the error of his ways. And he understands that even if he felt like exiling himself because of the fears that were born in him, it wasn't just fears of what Kylo was going to potentially become. It was more so a fear of what he was in danger of becoming. If he had that one fleeting moment of thinking about killing his own nephew for fear of the darkness within him and all the murder and bloodshed he would wield, what does that mean for Luke? Bear in mind, call back on the original trilogy. Luke is no stranger to almost succumbing to the dark side, to almost giving himself over to it. Granted, he didn't in the end, but he damn near did. When confronted with Vader, as sort of pushed on by Palpatine, by the Emperor, egged on, manipulated, Luke almost gave in to his anger and his fear. He very nearly did. He was, all through Empire and Jedi, it was something very heavily conflictual within him. Granted, at the last stage, he would make the better choice. But he's not going to be that, locked in that moment for the rest of his life. He still has so much more of his life to live. And people don't seem to comprehend that. They think Luke, from where we left him in the final scene in Jedi, that is Luke for all time. It's not. You know, back when I went to take my GED, I had dropped out of school because my mother had been ailing and was soon to pass away after having lost my father 5 years earlier. I remember meeting a 58-year-old man who had never learned to read and who had now had a grandson who had, spurned on this want for him to be educated because he wanted to read stories, bedtime stories, to his grandson. At 58 years old, he never learned to read, and he was there to learn how to read. Are you going to tell me that what that man was at the age of 20, when he was first having his children, when he had an ideal estimation of the world, when he was first starting a career, is who he is for the rest of his life? No, because we are all growing and evolving. And Luke went on a journey. Okay, we haven't, I haven't read the extended, sort of tie-in materials, the comics and the books where I'm well familiar with all of that stuff. Most people won't be familiar at all with any of it, the journey he was on. And I think that's where a lot of the conflictual estimations of his character in The Last Jedi come from, because people aren't familiar with the story, even though they do outline it in dialogue. Luke didn't just run away because he was scared of Kylo, or he was scared of the fate of the universe, or he was just a coward. He was afraid of becoming Darth Vader Mark II himself. If he could feel, even at this late stage when he thought the Jedi were this benevolent order, this awe-inspiring goodness of the light side of the Force and all these things, if he could still be spurned on to be tempted by fear, which would lead to anger, which would lead to hate, which would lead to destruction, as Yoda pounded into his mind, if even at this late stage he could succumb to that, even for a fleeting moment, what more choice did he have than to exile himself? When thought dead, when thought killed by his own nephew, who had become Kylo Ren at that point, manipulated to the dark side by Snoke and all that kind of stuff, a true force that was only burgeoning and becoming worse and worse and worse. If thought dead in that moment, and confronted with the fact that he himself could still yield toward the dark side, what other choice does he have? But to hide himself away, to let people assume him dead, and not want to risk that fragility, that humanity, to be manipulated as Ben was. People are taking issue with the fact that he went to the nth degree. He was willing to sacrifice himself to save his father, because he assumed that Vader, Anakin, still had some aspect of the light within him. And that's true. He went to the nth degree. He was willing to sacrifice himself to confront his father because he sensed that light side. But every aspect we have of Kylo, everyone who can sense him, senses that, there is no saving him. And that's arguable, because even Snoke himself says, well, there is some conflict. But Kylo killed his own father. He was going to kill his mother, only barely hesitated. And right there you have the dichotomy between the two characters of Ben Solo Kylo and Luke, where the hesitation was to not kill on Kylo's part, and it was just as much to not kill on Luke's part, but both are coming from different ends of the Force spectrum. And Luke ran away, air quotes, became cowardice, succumbed to cowardice, tucked tail and ran, because he was fearful of what he might become. When confronted with a nephew who was pure evil, pure darkness, and for a fleeting moment, thinking of taking that man's life, that young man's life, what did that mean for Luke? What had he become? Maybe he had not so far evolved to the idealistic appraisal of the Jedi as he had assumed. Because he is human, and he is imperfect, and he has emotions, and he has feelings. And I think a lot of the people who are disparaging these aspects of his character, of the characterization of him in the film, are not being empathetic. They're not putting themselves in his position and understanding his feelings and emotions. You know, if you're a parent and your child is a serial killer, there's going to be an inborn conflict, a lot of conflictual emotions about that person. On the one hand, they are your blood, and you have to care about them in some way, but at the same time, look at how evil they are. You're not going to find that easy to live with, to reconcile. And what's more, what if that touches upon a darkness within you? What if you realize your own penchant for potentially going down that path? Anyone who has ever said, if somebody lays a finger on my child, I will kill them. And some people genuinely mean it. Some people are go beyond just the words. Well, if you have any estimation of the good and the bad in the world, and you realize how what a transgression that is, you're going to be personally in conflict with yourself. And that's what Luke was. And he felt, rather than jeopardize, potentially, the galaxy by leaving himself open to be weaponized by a Snoke, by a Kylo, manipulated to the dark side, which was a battle he won so many years ago, but because he is human, he's constantly evolving and growing and still always has those fears and those reservations and that frailty. What better objective could he possibly have than to hide himself, than to risk being weaponized or manipulated toward the dark side? And not a lot of people are understanding this. He exiled himself. He didn't go into hiding because he was a little scaredy coward. He went into hiding to preserve whatever balance there was in the universe and not risk his own being forced, being manipulated into a Darth Vader Mark II, into succumbing to the dark side, because he understood himself imperfect. The Jedi were not all that in a bag of chips. They weren't this benevolent force that was just, perfect, perpetual light side, perpetual good. They had bad aspects to them. They became complacent. They became blind to legitimate evils in their own pomposity. They allowed that evil not only to be born, but to flourish and to wipe the floor with everything. Where is the good in that? Luke had to exile himself to try to understand his own frailty, to put the cap on the bottle so there would never be any risk of his being manipulated and turned into a weapon like his father before him and like his nephew, while also trying to appreciate and understand the grander scheme, what the Jedi was, what they amounted to, where they went wrong. He was trying, even to this nth degree, to figure all that out when Rey came calling on him. And, she's the last thing he wanted to have to deal with. Here is another potential misstep, potential mistake, when I haven't even really understood myself and found an end game for myself. And that's where we first meet him. But if you watch the movie, you see the evolution of the character. He finds himself again. Through his interactions with Rey, though reluctant, though begrudging, she does manage to put him on the right path again. With the aid of Yoda as well and all these things, eventually he understands what he forgot so long ago, because he is an imperfect human being. He began to succumb to anxiety and fear and misgivings and all these things that we all go through. He is not a perfect hero character. He is a human being who did stellar, great things. He made great achievements, but those achievements were not what he would be for the rest of his life. You cannot rest on your laurels, on your success. There is still life to live beyond your successes. You can either fight to recapture that or try to do something grander, or you can actually understand the living, breathing world around you and realize your own, capabilities, realize where your limitations are. And Luke was on this path. He was on this journey. And he was fearful of his own, still even at this late stage, potentially succumbing and being manipulated toward the dark side. And so he cast himself away to try to understand things. And eventually he would still sense the darkness that was going on, being wielded, being wrought by his nephew. And so he thought the best estimation there could be is to take himself out. Remove himself entirely out of the running. He had gone to that island to die. They had assumed him dead. Most of the universe had assumed him dead. Only his nearest and dearest on both the light side and the dark knew that he was even in existence, that he was still even alive. And here comes Rey, with just as much forceability and capability to bending toward either side, either way, either direction, light or dark. And this re-inflamed Luke's misgivings because of his human fragility, because of his imperfectness. And yet, even in spite of that, he still went on the hero's crusade. He still went on the journey. He still found himself. He gained a better appreciation of things. Again, that sentiment from Yoda so many years ago that was forged into his mind that he had forgotten. You're always thinking about the future. You're always thinking about the worries and the fears and the anxieties. You're not thinking about the here and now, the people that surround you in the here and now. Because he was afraid of what he could become. He was afraid of what Ben was becoming. He was afraid of what the future held for the galaxy as a result of that, and what even darker turn could manifest if he had given in to that fleeting temptation to take out the evil that was his nephew, and thus succumb to it of his own accord. He really had no choice at that point. With the evolution, the growth that he had experienced, all of the learning he had done, only to be backhanded by his flesh and blood, his nephew, and then reacted to that fleetingly, again, just almost imperceptibly for a few seconds, did he contemplate quelling that evil before it could rear its head. But much as if he had killed his father and given into the dark side, or killed Palpatine, he would have thoroughly embraced the darkness within himself. And rather than risk that, he exiled himself away so that he would remain on the side of the light. I just don't think people are understanding that. They are cursorily going in and watching this movie and saying, where's the hero? Where's the lightsaber wielding badass? If you can tell me with a straight face that Luke, when he force projects himself in front of Kylo, and come at me, bro, that part of the film, if you can honestly, with a straight face, tell me that wasn't Luke the badass, what's wrong with you? And I have to assume you're not getting the full picture. You're not understanding the full brass tacks of it. If everything before that was, oh, he's a coward, he's a wimp dick, he went into hiding, he's a pussy, he's not the heroic character we left off with, and all these things, you're really not considering the bigger picture. You're not considering the wider story, the wider ramifications. You're not empathetically looking at where he is mentally, how he managed to get there. Through the dialogue it is revealed, but if you watch Star Wars Explained videos, and if you look at the tie-in material, the comics and books and all this kind of stuff, you can gain better perspective. And I am somebody who is a proponent for the argument that I don't want to have to go and read tie-in material. I don't want to have to go and read the comics, play the video games, read the novels to get the full estimation of the story. I'm right there with you on that. But even just a fleeting cursory familiarity with those aspects on the journey he was on will make you better understand the mindset he is in when we find him, which is then explained in the dialogue and shown in scenes in The Last Jedi. And it irks me that people are not getting it. Oh, they turned this hero from 30 years ago who I aspired toward and looked up to. They turned him into a wimp, a pussy, a coward. He ran hiding. He's no good anymore and all this stuff. You're not getting it. And that's my rant for the day. So if you made it to the end of the video, spontaneous Millennium Falcon, just for you. Let me know if you saw the Millennium Falcon in the video, comments and such like that, and let me know what you think of my estimation of things, of people's poor estimation of Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, and I'll catch you all later. May the Force be with you.